But anyway, we don't agonize. We organize. We have a great candidate, Joe Biden, President of the United States, Kamala Harris. We're on the road to victory, as I say. But we just win, baby. We have a will to win, and we will win because it is the right thing for our country. In the meantime, we have a security risk who wants to be president again.
Congresswoman
and
Nancy
we just
Pelosi.
can't let that happen to our country.
She is a fascinating animal, that Nancy Pelosi, but we don't agonize, we organize. Joining me now, my friend John Phillips of the great John Phillips Show. John, okay, Hillary Clinton is thought of as being, the old hag woman of Democrat politics, but it is Nancy Pelosi who's been driving this bus for a long time, and she's still on Team Biden?
It appears so, and I love the fact that, Gavin Newsom here in California always likes to quote old African proverbs before he ever makes a point. I love the fact that for Nancy Pelosi, her old African proverb is quoting Al Davis, the former owner of the Raiders, just win, baby. But from her point of view, Joe Biden's a kid. Don't forget, Joe Biden is younger than Nancy Pelosi. To her, he's a spring chicken. And if you think about just what they would have to do to replace Joe Biden on the ticket, they really have two options if they want to do it. They could either field a candidate to run against him in these primaries, which would require them to do it before the filing deadlines, and that has come and gone. The filing deadlines, obviously, for the states that have already voted, that's in the past. In fact, they went in the opposite direction. They moved the calendar around to rig it so that Joe Biden would win and any challenger wouldn't have an opportunity to defeat Joe Biden by putting his strongest states up first. The other alternative is for them to, I guess, launch some sort of coup at the Democratic convention. But if you're Team Biden, what you do is you just make sure he lays low between now and then, because when the convention comes and goes, if they hadn't replaced him by then, there's really no opportunity for them to do so. They're stuck with Joe Biden. And if you're Joe Biden, right now, you're in a strong place at keeping this nomination. Think about the case he would make to other Democrats. If, let's say, Obama or Pelosi or someone were to turn on him and say, okay, we think it's time for you to stand down and get out of the race. He is going to turn to them and say, look, I have the power of incumbency. That usually results in a win. Why would you give that up? I've beaten Donald Trump once before. We know I can beat him. Hillary Clinton could not, and the others are unknowns. So why would you pass on the guy who has beaten him before? And then the third case you would make is, I'm within the margin of error in all of these polls. Yes, I'm trailing consistently, but I'm within the margin of error, which makes me statistically tied. It would be better for them if they want to remove him, for him to be down 15 points than to be down 5 points. Because if he's just down 5 points, but down 5 points consistently, he could make the argument that they're tied.
Okay, so let's focus on the convention part, because very clearly that's the only way he's going to get the heave-ho. You say lay low, but Joe Biden can't lay low. We've seen this time and time again, John. Everyone remembers the dark speech with the Marines in the background and whatnot. That was Joe Biden's idea. I found out from a source that his staff tried to call him off of that for like 2 months, and finally he insisted that he give that speech. And of course, it cratered. He just did it recently with that stupid press conference, where he finally took an unscripted press conference, and it was an unmitigated disaster. He didn't have the reporters, he didn't have the questions. He is sometimes still his own man, and he's still a disaster. Laying low is not what he does.
Well, we talk about these gaffes. What bigger gaffe or what bigger disaster could you have if you're Joe Biden than to have a prosecutor who comes from the swamp, comes from literally that portion of Washington, D.C., say that you're not competent to stand trial and that no jury would convict you because they would look at you as someone who couldn't remember what they had for lunch. I don't know what else he can do at this point. If they didn't use that as the off-ramp to dump him, then what do they need?
Okay, so I guess I come at it from more of a 30,000-foot view thing, where the system is never going to allow the chance that this doddering old fool cost them the election. But maybe I'm giving them too much credit. Maybe I think they have too much control over Joe Biden. I always assumed they would strong arm him out, John. I assumed they would use maybe his son and all this legal stuff and said, hey, Joe, you kind of want a little slap on the wrist for your boy? I'd hate for you to get caught up in all this. Maybe it's time for you to retire, with dignity, of course.
If they were going to do that, they would have done that by now. Because let's say they decide that they want to dump him. Let's say that Pelosi and Obama and other power players within the Democratic Party determine that Joe's going to lose. You put all of those people in a room, Jim Clyburn, the rest of them. You think they can agree on who should replace him? Because you're going to have people who believe that by bypassing Kamala, that you're sexist and racist. You're going to have people like Bill Maher who believe that Gavin Newsom is the future of the party. You're going to have feminists who say, now, wait a minute, Hillary Clinton had more votes than Donald Trump in 2016. We should go with her. And I think at this point, we can rule out Hillary Clinton as a Democratic nominee, because if she wanted it, Joe Biden would be hanging in Jeffrey Epstein's cell by now.
All right. And you know what? Let's talk about Hillary for just a second, John, because she has been on the news, and this is a woman who's been a political animal for her entire adult life. She's on the news not sounding totally like a company woman. Here she was.
The thing that we keep seeing in poll after poll after poll is concern about Biden's age. Full stop. What should he do on this? Is a matter of sort of like underscoring his boundless energy, or should he embrace his 8 decades on Earth and the great wisdom he's gained through all of this?
I mean, do you all have of the above? All of the above. I mean, I talk to people in the White House all the time, and they know it's an issue. But as I like to say, look, it's a legitimate issue. It's a legitimate issue for Trump, who's only 3 years younger, right? So it's an issue.
That doesn't sound like a company woman, John. This is a woman who chooses her words carefully.
No, but keep in mind, all of these people have met with Joe Biden in private. They meet with him in places like airplanes and hotels and after long days. So whatever it is that we see on television is Joe Biden at his best. She has seen him probably privately in circumstances where he is much, much worse. And hiding the incapacities of politicians is something that's nothing new in politics. We know it happened with Woodrow Wilson when he had a debilitating stroke when he was in office. But Josh Rogan, who writes for the Washington Post, was a coworker of mine back when I worked at CNN. And he told me a story when he was a reporter for the U.S. Senate for Congressional Quarterly. He broke his arm, and he had his arm in one of those big casts. And someone gave him the idea that it would be cool to have every member of the U.S. Senate sign his cast. So he just went from office to office, and all the members of the U.S. Senate signed it. The last one that he needed the signature from was Robert C. Byrd, who was the senator from West Virginia at the time and had been there since Hector was a pup. And they took him into the guy's office, and the guy had a chair that had a huge back to it, and he was staring out a window. And they brought him up to the senator, and the aide literally put his hands on the chair, swiveled the chair around. Byrd was sitting there with this glazed look on his face, drool coming down his chin. They took a stamp that had his signature on it, and they put it in his hand. They took the sleeve of his jacket, they lifted his arm up, and they dropped it on the cast. And that was his signature on the cast. He never said a word. When it was finished, they then said, okay, it's time to go. And they walked Josh out of the room, and they turned the chair back around so he was staring out the window. And that man was a voting member of the U.S. Senate and was not removed for being incapacitated, was allowed to stay there until he died.